So we discussed about drawing and design and the characteristics of a drawing. We've seen the definition of a drawing. We've seen the different types of lines and what dot lines means. And we've seen the industrial standards, the different industrial standards that different countries uses. So for a learner now to go and do the cutting or the shearing, there are some of the tools that the learner must understand and know how to use. So before we see the tools, the measuring tools, there is some procedures so that you understand how this works and so that you understand why a learner must understand different sections in a manufacturing company. So for example, at BY Industries, the process begins in marketing. Then after the confirmation from the client, there is a design team that works on this one, and that's why another term for design is the drawing. Now this is where we discussed the types of drawings, the lines and things like that, and the manual and sketching and things like that. Now before we move now to practical part, at the factory section, where there will be some cutting using the shearing machine, and then later on bending. So there are some tools here that students or the learner must know how to use. And we categorize that tools into the theory part before we go to the factory and we'll start. So this section is where we are going to look at measuring tools. Measuring tools. So among the measuring tools, we have very many measuring tools, but we are going to discuss only the tools that are being used in cutting and bending section, because I teach only cutting and bending section. There will be somebody else who will be discussing welding and the tools that are used, tools of measurements that are used there. So one of the tools the main tool that we use in cutting and bending section is what is known as the measuring tape. Measuring tape. And as discussed earlier, according to Korean standards, all the unit of measurements when using the measuring tape must be in millimeters. So if you see our measuring tape, the units that are indicated here is in centimeters and inches. Okay, so there are some other industrial standards, other countries which uses inches, and there are some other countries which uses centimeters. But for Korean standards, centimeters, we must convert the centimeters into millimeters. And to discuss a little bit about measuring tapes, we have different types of measuring tapes. For example, here you see I have a 5-meter measuring tape. There is a 3-meter measuring tape. There is a 10 meters measuring tape. So the categories of measuring tapes is according to the length, the maximum length it can measure. So for us, because we measure very small products, we use 3-meter and 5-meter measuring tapes. So there is a way on how to use these measuring tapes. A learner must attend class also to learn on how to handle these measuring tapes. So for example, when I have a product, this is some of the products that we use, that we make here at BY Industries. As discussed earlier in earlier classes, we normally deal with sheet metal processing, metal sheets, and making the products which are related to metal sheets. So when a learner is using a measuring tape, he or she must use this section and to measure using almost the edge. This is now when you measure, the learner must not measure the dimensions of that product at the middle section of the product. That is it about measuring tape. So something that I want to mention about measuring tape is we are using measuring tape to measure the length or the width of a product. The width of a product, we are using that. So the next instrument, and it's a bit complicated here, it might take a lot of time to discuss about, is the vernier calipers. The vernier calipers. These vernier calipers, we are using it in shearing and bending to only confirm one parameter, and that is the thickness. That is the thickness of a product. The thickness of a product. So we don't have very many uses of vernier calipers during cutting and bending. It's just using to confirm the thickness of a product. Remember, we normally cut or shear and bend different products with different thicknesses. So in these vernier calipers, we have two different main types. So we have what is known as the digital vernier calipers, and we have two, the manual, okay, manual or analog vernier calipers. So nowadays it is very easy to use a digital, very easy to use, and I think I have one digital vernier caliper here. If you can see, we have a screen. We have a screen where it normally indicates the digits. So whenever you just measure thickness of a product, it will just indicate the measurements directly without you calculating any figure. There is a configuration of this digital. If you want it to indicate in inches, there is a button you have to configure. If you have to get the measurements in millimeters, you have also to just press a button, setting buttons, and you get that. And because we are using Korean standards in this industry, we must set our vernier calipers to indicate the measurements in millimeters. And also here, I have an example of an analog vernier caliper. As you can see, there is these parts of a vernier caliper with digits. The upper part is in inches and the lower part is in millimeters. So you have to indicate that. So there is methods of how to read a vernier caliper. So when we are teaching our learners, we normally teach them first how to use the analog vernier calipers before we introduce them to using the digital one, because they must understand how to use the vernier caliper. So there is a way of how to read that one. So for example, if you have the upper part and the lower part, so you normally have the digits here in the upper part, and then you at the lower part you have some indications here as well. Okay, so what you normally do, for example, this is 7. You've read your readings and you get there is a 7. So first of all, that indicates that you have 7 millimeters at the top. Okay, 7 millimeters at the top, and then at the lower part you must come and see these indications which coincides directly. Coincides means that it comes straight line with one of the top indications. So for example, this is 0, that means this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you see the fifth one coincided with the top part. So that means this is 0.5. Okay, this is 0.5, and your reading in that is 7.5 millimeters. So this is as simple as that. There is a more detailed way of how to read vernier calipers, but during cutting and shearing, we only need to know the thickness of a material and the accuracy. During these two processes, the accuracy of that thickness must be to 1 decimal place, because the accuracy of this, so for example, you see we can get of 2.6 millimeters of a product, let's say 3.2. Okay, so these are the accuracy of the products that we have as a sheet metal processing company. So the last measuring instrument that we use, so far we've seen the measuring tape and the vernier calipers, and that's mainly used during cutting or shearing. So the last instrument that we see here is known as the angle protractor. It's called the angle protractor. And this instrument is used to measure the angle of the bend. So that means this is the only instrument that is used during bending. So this is the instrument that we use after bending. So for example, after we bend a product like this, we have a product that we've bent into different directions like this one. So we have to confirm if this angle is 90 degrees or any angle that a client requested. So there is a way of how to handle also this angle protractor. So first of all, you have to align this one like this way, and then the way you have to read this angle protractor, you read it anti-clockwise. You read it from right to left. So there is two ways of how to read this one. There is two readings. There is 0 to 180 for anti-clockwise direction, and there is the outer reading from the outside also, which is 0 to 180 clockwise direction. So when you held this measuring tool against the product like this, you must ensure that you read from 0 from the right hand side towards the left hand side. And also another instrument that is being used during bending also is what we discussed earlier, the measuring tape. After bending also we must confirm if the length after bend is what is required in the drawing. And the way you clip the bend, you don't clip from the edge, the cut section, from the finished section, you clip the bend section like this. This is how to read the length of a product after bending.